This is an Audio Wool original.
This episode of Frightday is brought to you by Spring-Heeled Jack Coffee. You need great coffee. Jack delivers. Visit springhieldjack.coffee.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you'd like to support us, go to patreon.com/frightday.
All right. Everything's fine. I'm ready to start the show, I guess.
Everything's great.
Yeah. Everything's... I stink, Kelly. I smell really bad right now.
Why?
I don't know. I feel like, if we were in the same space, I'd be embarrassed, but I'm still...
Are you using hippie deodorant? Is this the problem?
You
are, aren't you?
No.
You're trying to avoid getting Alzheimer's, so you're using hippie deodorant without fucking aluminum, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't want cancer. I don't want...
No, it's the odds are incredibly small. You need to look at the statistics. Like, of all the things that can cause cancer, those drinks that you drink are like a billion-fold your fucking deodorant.
It is Frightday. I'm your host...
Byron.
That's me. Although terrestrial radio is almost dead, and electromagnetic waves have all but been replaced by satellite signals, there was a time when Hertz delivered us tunes and news. But what happens when an unknown signal creeps in, hijacking the frequency? We'll talk about that as we review Andrew Patterson, or James Montague's The Vast of Night. And... in 1957, the Soviets launched an aluminum ball into orbit, intensifying the space race. As Sputnik 1, the first artificial Earth satellite, circled the globe, two amateur radio operators and brothers turned their ears to the sky in the hopes of hearing its transmissions. However, the frequencies they heard left them freaked. It's the Judica Cordia brothers and more phantom signals from space. In this week's edition of Kelly's Cryptids and Conspiracies, I'm joined tonight by Kelly.
Oh, hello.
And Sam can't make it. He's got that radio gig, spinning records, smoking cigarettes, and delivering the news.
No, he doesn't.
What else is he doing?
He's shooting at the UFOs that flew over town during the basketball game.
Okay, that's another option.
Hey guys, guess what? I've got a story about Trump that has nothing to do with me being political or bashing anybody. Believe it or not, there hasn't been a ton of big news in the world of the paranormal, but there are two things I want to discuss tonight. One of them is Trump's discussion of Roswell. Now, he was being interviewed by a relative, so the questions were a bit softball-y, okay?
I've heard from some of our mutual friends that you don't love my beard, but given the quarantine, I'd like to know, between myself, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul, who have all grown sort of quarantine beards, who's his best and why?
Well, I don't like it on you, as I've told you. Yeah. And I think that's fine if you want to do it. I'm a libertarian in that way. You can do whatever you want.
But he seemed to indicate that he knows more about Roswell than he's letting on.
Before you leave office, will you let us know if there's aliens? Because this is the only thing I really want to know. I want to know what's going on. Would you ever open up Roswell and let us know what's really going on there?
So many people ask me that question.
He said that he's heard, and I quote, very interesting things about Roswell.
I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting. But Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
Talked about declassifying information.
Sure.
The thing that got a little confusing to me in the interview, and this was with his son, he said there's a lot going on there, which then got me thinking, like, okay, either A, he's actually talking about Dulce, B, he's talking about the past but incorrectly using the present tense, or C, he doesn't know and he's just pretending he knows. And I don't know which it is.
Could be any of those.
Well, it's interesting to me because a lot of the people who are very into high strangeness, again, no generalizations, but a lot of them are pretty supportive of Trump. And one of the biggest reasons that I hear echoed over and over again is because they really believe that Trump is more likely to be a disclosure president than anybody we've had in recent memory.
So you're saying you may declassify?
Oh.
You'll take it?
Well, I'll have to think about that one, right? I'll have to think.
Now, of course, you could make the argument about Podesta and Hillary and how he had these interests, but then you hear people say that that was actually just disinformation.
Yeah.
Who the hell knows? But I did think it was interesting that across the news this week came TikToking Donald Trump discussing Roswell.
I mean, not TikToking like on the app doing a dance or...
Oh, no, he's
funny
very angry
challenge.
with them right now.
Okay, we don't need to talk about that, though.
Nope, we don't need to.
I mean, do you think that Don Jr. planned this as the last question of this Father's Day interview, or...
The only thing I can think of is that he wanted to beat, who is it that always asks? Is it Jimmy Kimmel or...
I think it is Kimmel.
This is a question that I think is very important to me and very important to the country. When you were in office, and I don't know when this happened or if it happened, did you go through the secret files, the UFO documents? Because if I was president, that'd be the first thing I did.
You know, it's funny. My daughters asked the very same question.
They did. The moment I was inaugurated, my hand would just, it'd still be hot from touching the Bible, and I would immediately race to wherever they have the files about Area 51 and the UFOs, and I go through everything to find out what happened. Right. Did you do that?
That's why you will not be president. Because that's the first thing that you would do.
It's at the
The
top
aliens
of my
won't
list.
let it happen. You reveal all their secrets.
And Kimmel's been canceled, so
Well.
maybe Trump Jr. just said, now I know Kimmel's not going to be able to ask my dad this question,
Sure.
so I got to represent, I'm going to ask it myself. There's our Trump news for the week, Trump related to Roswell. Anybody else hears anything that he says that I might miss about disclosure? Let me know, because clearly, all other opinions aside, it'd be great if we found out more about the UFO secrets. Now, there is a book that's out this week that I am hoping might be the crowning blow to my husband's disbelief in Bigfoot. And that book, Byron, have you heard about this book?
No, I haven't. I'm
You
waiting
haven't?
on bated breath.
Well, Max Brooks, who wrote World War Z, right? He just wrote a book called Devolution, like opposite of evolution.
Yeah.
That's about Bigfoot. Sam was reading the foreword to me, and it's one of those books where the foreword is written by a fictional character, right? Written like it's a true story. So even the foreword is part of that fiction. But in the foreword, the main character of the story discusses how he researched Bigfoot, and he named Mr. Dr. Meldrum as one of his top research sources.
That's our boy.
He's very excited about that. And I also don't understand how somebody as funny as Mel Brooks has a son that just likes horror. It's interesting, isn't it? What a contrast.
Yeah, but comedy and horror have quite a bit in common with each other. And you know I have the logo from the Zombie Survival Guide tattooed on my bicep. It's a buddy tattoo I got in high school.
Oh.
I'm very excited for this. I had no idea.
Yeah, Sam's already started it, and he says it's pretty darn good. He's enjoying it.
Well, cool.
Now, maybe we could interview Max about Bigfoot and see if he believes. He's done a few interviews himself about that, but less than you might think. We could really dig into it.
I'll reach out to Max.
Because why not?
Because why not, Kelly?
Oh.
Do you want to tell him what we're doing this week?
So Kelly really has not tapped into her stores of wine that she's accumulated over the pandemic, and it's time for Wine Kelly to put a dent in that stash.
Frightday
And what better way
Scranium.
to do it than with a 3-hour-long movie?
Is it 3 hours long that I'm committing to? Oh, no.
It actually might be longer, Byron. Hold on.
Well,
Close Encounters
for those who
of
don't
the
know.
third kind.
Frightday Scranium, folks have been asking for it. We're doing another episode of Toast to Toast PM with Wine Kelly, and as you just heard her typing, Close Encounters of the... What kind is it? Third? I always get this mixed
Third.
up. Third kind. Okay.
Los Trace.
I've never seen that film, and...
I lied. It's only 2 hours and 18 minutes. It's not so bad, Byron.
as long as we don't do director's cut. Is there a crow yelling in the background? Are you
I
on
think
the...
there's a crow and some semi-trucks yelling. Hold on.
Are you outside again?
Oh, no, I wish I was.
Oh, just closing the window then.
I think Sam just had the window open so that it was more comfortable up here.
Excited to talk about this film with you after my first time, and you will be inebriated, and you'll probably just yell at me for maybe 2, 3, 4 hours.
I just still can't believe that you haven't seen it. It
Well.
just blows my mind.
Can't wait. And that should be up on our Patreon, patreon.com/Frightday sometime soon. I'm looking forward to it.
Are you really, though?
It's time for staff picks.
They say so much, but they never tell you if it's any good.
Werewolf movie with E.T.'s mom in it.
The Howling, horror, straight ahead.
Staff picks. Let's hear yours first, Byron, because you're not going to like mine this week.
Okay, I mean, you might not like this one. Have you heard of a film called Squirm?
It was a violent summer storm. Millions of volts slashed the earth.
That was the worst storm we've had since I was knee-high to a duck.
Folks talked about it and started getting things back to normal. When Mick hit town for his vacation.
Well, it's straight ahead about 5 miles.
But things weren't normal. There were changes.
Ooh, Mother bit me. I never saw one bite like that.
Strange, frightful changes. That night, it all started.
Stop doing that.
I'm not doing anything.
They came from everywhere. Millions of writhing, seething creatures oozing out of the mire to feed on human flesh.
No, I haven't. It sounds like it's about worms. Is it about worms?
Well, late in the evening of September 29th, 1975, a sudden electrical storm struck a rural seacoast area of Georgia. Power lines, felled by high winds, sent hundreds of thousands of volts surging into the muddy ground, cutting off all electricity to the small secluded town of Fly Creek. During the period that followed the storm, the citizens of Fly Creek experienced what scientists believe to be one of the most bizarre freaks of nature ever recorded. This is the story. And that's the opening scroll. Is that what they scroll?
Scroll, I think.
Maybe crawl. And that's the opening crawl of the film. I love it when they do that. It reminds me of the opening card before Maximum Overdrive kicks off. This film, released 1976, written and directed by a guy named Jeff Lieberman. What is the worst place to be when worms turn against us, Kelly?
When worms turn against us? I mean, I guess...
Maybe not next to a worm farm.
No, you don't want to be there.
That's where we're at. Where there's hundreds of thousands of worms turning against us. It's slimy. They're skeletonizing all of the locals. This is an example of when I was young, I would go to a video store and I'd always look at the box art, and it was always these natural horror films that grabbed me the tightest. Films like Savage Bees, Piranha, Frogs. Do you remember that one?
No. I mean, I think I remember hearing about it. Yeah. I never saw it for sure.
And even more recently, films like Arachnophobia and Bats. They usually have the same level of silliness, poor pacing, bad acting. But I love them. They have a certain charm to them. And Squirm, although I just found it recently, I dig it just as much.
I mean, Byron, sell us on this. Why do we want to handle that?
Worms. Gross, slimy worms. And that's all I got.
Byron, I'm just going to tell you, you have not sold me on watching that movie.
That's okay. I didn't expect it.
My pick for the week is a little film from the 1970s, 1976 to be exact.
Interesting. Same year as this film.
Which is kind of almost uncanny, Byron. We're on the same wavelength, just at different points. We're like quantum entangled, Byron.
Okay.
Has some pretty incredible cast members. I'm going to name a few of them, see if you pick up on any of them. We've got ourselves a Scott Baio.
Okay. Scotty Baio.
We've got ourselves a Jodie Foster.
Okay, Jodie Foster, all right.
There is a lot of music in it.
Oh.
And a lot of shooting.
Oh, I mean, that sounds better.
Like so much shooting. And it takes place in the 1920s. John Cassisi, who actually went on to do nothing else, but he was real good in this movie.
Sure. Are you going to tell me what it is?
So the movie that's my pick for the week is Bugsy Malone. 1976, classic gangster story of Bugsy Malone told with an all-child cast.
So nothing horror.
Well, there is a lot of shooting. It's they shoot whipped cream.
Oh, if you do this again, you're fired from the show. I'm sorry. You can't do it.
Joey,
the only reason I'm letting this stand is because I did Squirm, and this is Bugsy, and it's kind of Bugs.
And they're both from 1976. Like, legitimately, that's kind of weird. Don't you think that's
You're
kind of weird?
a literal
I think that's
nightmare,
weird.
and I want you to retract your statement and just say you didn't have a film this
No,
week.
I do. I do. That is a very important movie.
No.
There is some really incredible messaging in that movie that you should watch.
What are you talking about? This is a horror podcast. No,
you don't understand. You don't understand. It's really, really good.
There's a lot of good movies that aren't horror films.
I really think that you need to watch it. Get past whatever you think it is or whatever you think it isn't.
No, stop arguing this. Just drop your head and we'll move on. It's okay.
No, it's so good. Okay, here's my actual staff pick for the week. Fine. Although this is my second staff pick for the week because Bugsy Malone is a staff pick. My second staff pick for the week is a movie that we actually... Are we allowed to use movies that we reviewed?
What do you mean?
Can my staff pick of the week be a movie that we reviewed like 3 years ago?
Yeah, as long as you think it needs a light on it.
I do. Okay, so the problem with me using the staff pick is I can't give the actual full reason that I used it because it would be a spoiler.
Okay.
But the movie Honeymoon...
So we didn't get a regular wedding cake. We decided on something that was special for us instead.
I love you, honeybee. So this is the famous family cottage.
Do you like it?
Here's what I see. The woods. A lake. No one around. B? This isn't funny. B? Please! B! You okay? I couldn't find you.
I must be sleepwalking. I'm fine.
which came out in 2014, for whatever reason remains one of my favorite understated horror movies. Just suffice it to say, it incorporates some horror elements of which I am a big fan. I think it is really underrated. For whatever reason, a lot of people didn't see it. I don't know if it was because it was so indie, but the director is a female. She's young, or at least I'm considering her young because she's only a couple years older than me, and otherwise that would make me sad.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't want that.
She also, Byron, she's directing Fear Street and Fear Street 2. I don't know if you have heard about those.
Yeah, of course I have.
Just making sure. It's the R.L. Stine books.
I don't believe that we actually covered Honeymoon for the show.
Really?
I think we watched it before. It was on our list of best horror films from 2014, but I don't believe we actually watched it. So
okay, good. So I really am not cheating here. It is such a cool movie. I plan on watching it again in the next week or two just because it popped up on my radar because I saw somebody else posting about it earlier this week, and I thought, you know, that one needs another watch. I really enjoyed it.
yeah, Rose Leslie's performance is great. Small cast, beautiful location. It's a really, really cool film.
I will say that if you're more of a fan of like the slasher genre, you should probably just go watch that Squirmy Wormy one.
All right. Well,
if you're a fan of musicals, you should watch Bugsy Malone. But if you're a fan of understated, creepy horror, you should watch Honeymoon.
all right. Well, and that's staff picks. Check those out and return them on time. There's really no way to sign out of this segment.
I mean, it's pretty great. I think it's nice for people to have some options from staff picks.
Sure.
People who like horror watch other things too, Byron.
We passed the midpoint, Kelly. Another Moon June almost in the bag.
Almost in the bag?
Aye.
The body bag?
Okay, so now we're talking bodies.
With dead cosmonauts?
In this week's edition of Kelly's Cryptids and Conspiracies.
Kelly's Cryptids and Conspiracies.
April 12th, 1961. The U.S. suffered a terrible blow in their Cold War against the Soviet Union.
If you had left New York by car at 7 minutes past 1 this morning, by 2:55 you could have made Philadelphia, 95 miles in an hour and 48 minutes. In that same time this morning, a man went around the world. 25,000 miles, 17,000 miles an hour. Nobody else has ever done anything like it. Nobody else can really know how it feels. His vehicle, a machine that until today was only a term in the vocabulary of fiction. It was a spaceship, propelled into orbit by the power of a huge rocket, circling the Earth at altitudes you can't measure by height, only by distance, as much as 180 miles out beyond the surface of the globe. The spaceship was built in Russia. The takeoff and the landing somewhere in Russia. The name of the man, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, major in the Soviet Air Force, the first man into space.
Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to journey into outer space and thus lit a rocket engine beneath the Americans to beat the Soviets to the moon. Or at least that's how the story goes. We all know that some of the stuff we learn about in history class isn't exactly an accurate representation of what happened in the past. Tulsa riots.
Christopher Columbus given the Native Americans a turkey at Thanksgiving, of course, right?
Right. It was a big happy Festivus.
In time, Gagarin may become one of those universal heroes of mankind like Columbus or Magellan.
So since the fall of the Soviet Union, however, there have been documents that have emerged, and some of these documents support the theory that additional cosmonauts may have secretly died before the USSR's official victory, more after the USSR's official victory, and even some reports suggesting that there were cosmonauts that made it into space significantly earlier than Yuri. They just didn't make it back alive. So tonight, we're going to talk about some of those stories, also examine the possibility that maybe the Americans had the same issue. I mean, Americans are pretty good at covering stuff up. There's always a possibility that, I don't want this to seem, like anti-Russian. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that there are reports of similar things with the Americans. They just may be buried deeper.
The Russians, they put poor Laika in the sky, that stray dog from the streets of Moscow.
Oh, yeah, that was mean.
It wasn't nice.
That's
it's
true.
Sad. It's pretty sad.
I can get behind saying that's mean.
Yeah. Sarah McLachlan, too.
Oh, God. Can't watch that. Can never hear that song again. So what is it that makes people think that there were fallen cosmonauts that came before Yuri? We're going to talk about a couple of pieces, and then we're going to get into of this core.
There's so many dogs. I had no idea.
That have been shot into space and killed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
All right.
We should have put a warning up. Some people are as bothered by that. I mean, I'm almost as bothered by that as I am by children dying, so.
Did they send children to space?
I mean, isn't that supposedly what Roswell was? A bunch of experimented on children from the Nazi scientists?
I forgot about that.
Yeah, remember? The uncovered death of Valentin Bondarenko. This Soviet pilot began training as a cosmonaut in 1960. He was supposedly one of the original, quote-unquote, 20, or at least the 20 that were first reported, this cosmonaut crew that the Soviets created. He had a very fun nickname, too. His nickname was Tinkerbell.
I like it.
Which is kind of funny when you think about a light shooting through the sky. He was only 23 years old at the time this story occurred. And here is the grim story. Worth noting, this only emerged 20 years later in 1980. It was covered up for quite a long time. All right. 23rd of March 1961 was the 10th day of a 15-day endurance experiment in a low-pressure altitude chamber at the Institute of Biomedical Problems in Moscow. The chamber's atmosphere was at least 50% oxygen. That's very high oxygen contact. Okay. Bondarenko, having completed work for the day, removed monitoring biosensors from his body and washed his skin with an alcohol-soaked cotton ball, which he then discarded. The cotton ball landed on an electric hot plate, which he was using to brew a cup of tea. This is why people can't have hot plates in dorm rooms. The cotton ignited, and Bondarenko tried to smother the flames with the sleeve of his woolen coveralls, which caught fire in the chamber's oxygen-rich atmosphere.
Yeah, oxygen's
so we've got
gonna
a
be a
whole
problem.
series of bad things here.
Yeah.
We got way too much oxygen. We got flammable materials. We've got a confined space. This is all very bad. Because of the pressure difference, it took a watching doctor nearly half an hour to open the chamber door.
Oh, God. I mean...
Bondarenko's clothing burned until almost all the oxygen in the chamber was used up, and he had suffered third-degree burns over most of his body. The attending physician at Botkin Hospital, surgeon and traumatologist Vladimir Goliakovsky, recalled in 1984 that while attempting to start an intravenous drip, the only blood vessels he could find for inserting the needle were on the soles of Bondarenko's feet.
This must have been
where
good
his
shoes.
flight boots had warded off the flames.
All right. Tea is supposed to be fun and relaxing.
It is. This is not relaxing, though. But here's the kicker. All right, now, this is the part that gets very, very interesting. According to this doctor, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin spent several hours at the hospital as death watch officer. Bondarenko died of shock 16 hours after the accident, less than 3 weeks before Gagarin's first spaceflight aboard Vostok 1. The manned orbital flight program director, Nikolai Kamenin, blamed Bondarenko's death on the Institute's poor organization and control of the experiment. Okay, so let's just take a step back here.
Yeah, what is a death watch officer?
Oh, it means that, like, he's standing by, they know he's going to die, and he's, like, the officer that's keeping an eye on things.
Oh, okay.
Whether that means he's trying to keep the guy from spilling the beans, or whether it's because that's like an honorable thing to do, I don't really know.
Yeah,
I'm
classic
not.
bean spill
I understand very
prevention.
little about military and even less about Soviet military, so I don't know. But this is 3 weeks before Yuri became the official first dude in space. And this story, the Soviets covered up like nobody's business. The fact that this was covered up, and this story has been verified, okay? This has led a lot of people to believe that, okay, well, if this was covered up so easily, there probably was quite a bit else that was covered up. It's important to note the quote-unquote evidence we have of cosmonauts actually dying in space is not quite as concrete as the documents we have supporting, for example, the death of Valentin Bondarenko, okay? The death of Valentin Bondarenko. I really should have picked not Russian names.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's so
why.
hard.
Oh, it's very bad for me. Okay. Now, he was awarded posthumously some award that I'm not going to try and pronounce in Russian, but it was a service award, you know, for the duty and sacrifice he made to his Soviet Union. Other than that, it was completely buried. So this is a good foundational element for why we might question the story we've heard from now Russia about their Soviet space history. So over the years, there are a lot of people that have glommed onto stories like this and used that as reason to investigate relentlessly the possibility of more dramatic events, and perhaps dramatic events of people being launched into space, dying, and that not being reported, just as this gentleman with all of his third-degree burns was not reported. In theory, and again, we don't have this gentleman's name, so we don't know how factual this is, but there is a story that in late 1959, this communist leader from the Czech Republic, he leaked information about additional, unofficial, unreported flights into space, and actually named a few astronauts, cosmonauts that is, who supposedly died during these missions. One of them was a gentleman named Alexei Ledovsky. There were others, Andrei Mitkov, Sergei Shiborin, and Maria Grimova. Now, unfortunately, because I was unavoidably delayed by the solstice and by Mercury retrograde, I did not have a chance to read the full book, but I did start perusing it, and you better believe I'm going to finish it. It's called The First Soviet Cosmonaut Team, Their Lives, Legacy, and Historical Impact. It's written by Colin Burgess. It has a lot of photos of this original 20 cosmonaut team that I was telling you about, but there's evidence that certain versions of those photos have been doctored to remove people entirely.
Here we go.
Okay, but no, this is like, again, that isn't evidence that Soviets shot them into space and they died.
Yeah.
But it is evidence that there's something a little bit off.
This is moon bases all over again. I don't believe that they had the Photoshop capabilities back then. But
oh, absolutely they did. It just took a lot. It wasn't nearly as clean.
Yeah,
and it took a lot more effort. But keep in mind, when you've got a really shitty reproduced photo and you don't have the ability to blow it up, look at it on a screen, and it is already really pixelated, in some ways it's easier to alter a super pixelated photo than it is to alter a high def photo, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's more art at that point when you're distorting things purposefully. It's easier to do when something is blurry. I'll give you that.
Exactly. I want to read more of this book because Colin Burgess gets into some of this, and it really isn't written from like this conspiratorial perspective. It's written from a historical, hey, these people deserve our respect perspective. For example, when you bring it up on Amazon, it doesn't suggest crazy wild books and unverifiable documentaries to go along with it because you looked at that book. It suggests other legit space history books.
You really can judge the quality of what you're about to purchase by the suggested products below.
Or at least judge the perception of what you're about to purchase.
So we kind of moved past this whole space race thing. What was it?
Oh, yeah, sure, you bet.
For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom. and peace, we have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Too bad Sam's not here.
Yeah,
Kelly's history knowledge
seems
sucks.
like the kinda
Basically,
guy.
after World War II, we entered into the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
One of the elements of the Cold War was who's going to get to space first, because a lot of it was about who's got the best weapons. And obviously, having control over space is a pretty big weapon. And so it was who's going to get to space first.
And this kind of ties into our Nazis on the Moon episode a little bit.
Sure does. Because we brought all those Operation Paperclip fellows. Do you remember, I don't know, this just jumped into my brain. Do you remember from like old school Microsoft Word, the little icon that would like jump around on the screen and you could click on him and he would give you like help topics and advice for what you were doing? And it was the little paperclip guy.
His name was Clippy.
There you go. Unfortunately, now I'm associating that with Nazi German scientists. But
Yeah, Clippy's political leanings are a little problematic.
he's a little bent out of shape for sure.
I think he
But
is.
yeah, so we utilized all of that information to compete with the Soviet Union in the space race. And like I said, it was a really big deal. In fact, most Americans refused to believe Yuri actually made it into space in 1961. A lot of Americans did not accept it as fact until President Kennedy got up on stage and verified it and said, yes, this is what happened.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take.
And as kind of like insult to injury, only a couple months after that, they sent another one into space.
Oh,
so now they had
come on.
sent 2 cosmonauts into space before we had. Again, this seems weird because you feel like, okay, America had a lot of money. We had all these Nazi scientists. Why couldn't we beat them to the punch? And perhaps one of the reasons we couldn't beat them to the punch is because they were perfectly willing to sacrifice people along the way. Now, I'm not saying that we didn't do the same thing, because I wouldn't be surprised to find out that we did. Also, as we talked about earlier this month, it really sounds like technology that we had during the war was subpar compared to the technology that the Nazis were developing. So maybe we just have not been the technologically superior country that we thought we were, right? And that is part of what the Cold War was about.
And we're focusing on the late 1950s, early 1960s. There was no death recorded as part of this race between us and the Soviet Union to get into space until 1967.
That's correct, partially. So like Bondarenko, it was recorded, but it wasn't made public until the 80s. So even though it happened before that first officially recorded one, it now is on official record. It just wasn't on official record.
I mean, that was in training, though. We weren't in space during that.
That's very true. And both sides have suffered public deaths in terms of the space race. I mean, that's not debatable. In fact, I suppose since we're on the topic, we should talk about the 3 gentlemen who died when they were practicing, and this is on NASA's side.
Yeah, Apollo 1, right?
Yeah. This is a really grim story. We've got 3 guys, Virgil Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee. And these 3 guys were preparing for a space mission. Again, as Byron said, they were in Apollo 1. They were doing a ground test in the actual module. This ground test actually hadn't even been flagged as potentially hazardous, so I think people were pretty relaxed about it because certain missions that the astronauts do in training obviously are recognized as being very high risk. This was not one. So for example, when the Challenger exploded in '86, although it was obviously incredibly tragic, at least everybody recognized that taking off was hazardous, right? Like they've got the lit rocket boosters, things are exploding. It's a scary scenario. This scenario was not a scary one, and yet it ended in tragedy.
This is Mike Wallace at the CBS Newsroom in New York. America's first 3 Apollo astronauts were trapped and killed by a flash fire that swept their moonship early tonight during a launch pad test at Cape Kennedy in Florida. Virgil Gus Grissom, 40 years old, one of the original Mercury astronauts, the first American astronaut to go twice into space. Edward White, 36 years old, the first American to walk in space. And rookie astronaut Roger Chaffee, 31 years old, training for his first space flight, Apollo 1, scheduled for February 21st. These 3 astronauts were aboard their spaceship 10 minutes from a simulated liftoff at Cape Kennedy when the fire hit at about 6:30 tonight. They were inside their spaceship, pressurized, buttoned up inside their spacesuits when the fire hit. A closed-circuit television camera was relaying pictures of the astronauts lying on their backs inside the spacecraft atop the 2-stage Saturn I. There was a flash, and that was it, according to a NASA spokesman watching the television screen in the blockhouse a few hundred yards away from Launch Pad 34. The screen went blank, and he said there was no communication from the astronauts. They died silently and apparently swiftly. Their bodies have been left in the spacecraft, according to the latest information from the Cape, pending an investigation into the disaster.
And this, very similar to the Bondarenko situation we just discussed, had a lot to do with oxygen. There was an electrical spark that ignited a fire, which engulfed their high pressurized, pure oxygen cabin. This is just me connecting dots that maybe shouldn't be connected, but I'm going to anyway. If we had known about the death of Bondarenko, we may have had this oxygen issue much higher on our priority list than we did. Although every good scientist understands the flammability of oxygen, and so, you know, that's also maybe their bad. But
I don't think it was something that they didn't consider.
Right. So these were the first U.S. astronaut deaths publicly associated with spaceflight. And I only say publicly associated because I'm trying to be equal opportunity here between the Soviets and the Americans. We may have had other deaths too. I just haven't been able to uncover anything about it.
And I'm not sure if there's a depiction of this incident in the film Apollo 13 or the more recent film starring Ryan Gosling, First Man. Was that?
Hey, we got a bad fire!
Do you know I still haven't watched that, Byron? How insane is that?
It seems like something you should be watching during Moon
I
June.
love astronauts. I love Gosling. I think I'm just holding out and waiting for him to come out with another album.
Just watch the movie. It's really good.
Okay, I will.
Hey folks, it's me, Byron, and I've got some explaining to do. I've been advised by our lawyer that even though I personally believe this, and I really do, I can no longer legally say that Spring Hill Jack coffee is the only known cure for COVID-19. However, I can say that drinking a brew made from their masterfully roasted beans can't hurt. Why don't you stockpile Spring Hill Jack coffee while you still can. Go to springhieldjack.coffee or search Spring Heeled Jack Coffee on Amazon. That's SPRINGHEELD Jack.coffee. You can thank me later. I legally can't say it will save your life.
We had a history of tragedy, as the Soviets did, with this race to the moon. And it's just like anything else. We're doing very high-risk things, trying to prove that we are a superior world power to the Soviets. They were on the same mission, and so there were quite a few casualties along the way. Very, very sad. And in fact, one of the people who died in the Apollo 1 accident was a gentleman who had recently been into space, walked the same road that Yuri walked, so to speak, I guess. It was a real bummer. But, Byron, as you accurately pointed out, there have been other deaths starting in 1967. On record, like official record, we have 15 astronaut deaths and 4 cosmonaut deaths. Now, again, this is a stat that, I like to at least claim that I'm not an ethnocentrist. I'm not obsessed with America. I'm not an overzealous patriot, but it is hard for me to believe that many more Americans were killed than Soviets. It just seems like an odd ratio to me.
I don't know. Look at their coronavirus numbers. They're handling that very well publicly.
Right. That's kind of the thing. And in fact, Byron, that 15 count doesn't even include the 3 we just talked about with Apollo 1 because they were on the launch pad and technically not in space flight. I think it's very easy for Americans to claim superiority here. The technological differences, though, it is very hard for me to accept the fact that if we include those 3, it's 18-4. That just seems odd.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't.
Well, let's count their dogs. Throw those in there.
Oh, that's true. How many dogs, Byron? What's the dog count?
How many dogstronauts? Cosmopups? Space dogs. Oh, that is a film from
the streets to the stars.
Poland. Yeah, that's not the right thing. Come back to me.
I'll come back to you. You betcha.
I've got the number now.
Oh, go for
1,
it.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 suborbital flights, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 orbital flights.
And all of them died?
I have not read through all of them.
Let's figure out dog space deaths. Byron.
Okay.
This is imperative.
Well, I feel like they're not even recording them as deaths because 4 other dogs flew in September and 2 or more were lost. It's just they don't even consider it.
Oh my God, one of them they blew up on purpose just because they didn't want us to be able to inspect the capsule and steal their technology.
All right. Well, yeah, it seems actually pretty rough. I don't like this anymore.
I don't like that either. Have we killed any? Have the Americans killed any dogs in space?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, Laika was the Russians.
Yeah,
Those 2 that we exploded were the
I
Russians.
I don't see any.
I keep saying the Russians. It's the Soviets. I need to not be ignorant. Okay.
Yeah.
Very sad. Probably more animals. I don't know. If you watched Space Force, we've got a chimpanzee. That was pretty tragic.
That was such a nice moment in that show. A good little
It
bottle
was.
episode.
I mean, until the chimpanzee.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But up until that point, it was. Another conspiracy that was afoot with all of this Soviet space work was the fact that they did some high-altitude equipment tests. Some people were investigating whether or not some of those high-altitude tests actually counted as going into space. Now, this is a bit more about semantics than it is about history or hidden history, so I don't find this one, quite as fascinating. However, there was a story where the New York Journal American published an article about lost cosmonauts, including 3 parachutists who had died. They were high-altitude parachutists. The Soviets got obviously very, very upset about this. They refuted it and sent the photographs of the actual parachutists, who also then wrote an angry letter to William Randolph Hearst from Newsies, played by Duvall, Clea's dad.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, he ignored it and never printed it or anything like that. And he wasn't necessarily the most scrupulous journalist, let's say, so I don't think that's one that we can necessarily hang our hat on. Again, tying back, I think really that Bondarenko, it's the legitimate root of what has sprung forth with the cosmonauts. If you look up lost cosmonauts, you're probably going to find similar phrases to what you find when you look up a number of Captain Kelly's topics. It's a fringe theory, and that's fine. It is. It has to be fringe because we don't have any hard evidence. But the closest we get to it, Byron, comes from a pair of lovely Italian brothers. And Byron, I'm going to let you pronounce their name because I've butchered enough Soviet names for a lifetime tonight.
It's the Utica Cordia brothers, Achille and Giovanni.
And they were a pair of interesting fellas. So as Byron hinted at during the intro, I don't know even where that. Oh, I do know where that came from. You know where that came from?
What?
Have you ever watched Darby O'Gill and the Little People?
Okay, so I don't.
That should have been my pick for the week.
Sure,
it is spooky as shit.
Doesn't matter.
There is a banshee in it that gets really scary. I had to
Kelly,
talk the
I'm not
girls
even
down.
asking you to watch these movies. I'm just asking you to pick a horror film.
There's a King Brian. The King of the Leprechauns is in it, and I think that's why I have Brian on the brain, which is why I'm calling you Brian instead of Byron. But I'm going to try and stick to Byron. Yeah, apologies. Okay. So these brothers in Italy, as Byron hinted at, were really interested when the first satellite launched into orbit.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth. Suddenly, it has become as much a part of 20th century life as the whir of your vacuum cleaner. It's a report from man's farthest frontier, the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York earlier today.
Amateur radio monitoring has always been a pretty fun hobby. Any of you who listen to old episodes of Art Bell, constantly talking about those ham radios. So much about the ham radios. This is, kind of an earlier iteration of those kind of hobbyists. So back in the late 50s, when the satellites were beginning to orbit, and into the early 60s, when we were starting to officially send people up, these two brothers are pointing their microphones to the sky. I'm sure that's not how it actually happened. I don't understand sound things. Byron, maybe you can explain how they actually recorded it, because I don't get those things, and you understand sound tech?
I understand sound tech. I don't understand vintage sound tech, but I can imagine that they were monitoring transmissions with some sort of transmission monitor.
Really? That's what you got for me?
I think that's all I got. I mean, they're calling it an experimental listening station.
Okay.
I don't exactly know how that works, but I'm sure it has something to do with frequencies and hertz, gigawatts, and stuff like that.
So keep in mind, all of this is occurring post-World War II, right? Just outside Turin, Italy, they found a German bunker that had been abandoned, and the site was named Torre Bert, for anybody who's familiar with Italy, and that means something to them. Maybe it does. I don't know. They started piecing equipment together. This probably looks something similar to when we started this remote setup at the beginning of the pandemic, and Kelly was trying to figure out how to make the equipment that Byron dropped off work for actually recording things.
I drew a detailed diagram. Come on now.
You did a great job. I am not blaming you for that. I blame you for a lot of things. I don't blame you for that. That was totally on me.
I appreciate that.
But these guys were able to piece something together and started monitoring transmissions, as you said, Byron, originally from the Sputnik program. Explorer 1, the first American satellite, was also monitored. Over time, they started picking up some more and more interesting things, and they released 9 recordings over 4 years. These recordings did not align with the official story that was being told about the Soviet space program. Interestingly enough, all of these recordings seem to be very specific to the Soviets. To the best of my knowledge, none of the recordings were in English. Who knows? Maybe they were secret American spies trying to make the Soviets look really, really bad. Or maybe these are things that they recorded, or maybe they are just over-enthusiastic, high-strangeness explorers before their time. Who knows? But we're going to play one of those recordings. I'm going to warn you guys, even though a very small number of you speak Russian, so very few of you will be able to literally understand what is being said. This is one of the more freaky sound bites I've ever listened to. If it is, in fact, real, it might destroy any young child's dream of ever wanting to become an astronaut. So if you feel like you need to set your kid's trajectory a little more realistically, and they won't stop talking about being an astronaut, maybe play this audio clip for them, read them the translation, and see if they still want to do it. So it's like, listen, come in, talk to me. I'm hot. What? 45, 50. Yes, breathing, oxygen. I am hot. Isn't this dangerous? Yes. How is this? Talk to me. How should I transmit?
Okay, in translation from that translation.
Listen, come in. Talk to me, I'm hot. What? 45, what?
You were being a little too calm for what's going on.
Talk to me, how should I transmit?
It's very overwhelming to me. Then she says, I can see a flame, I feel hot, 32, 41. Am I going to crash? Yes, I feel hot. Yeah. I feel hot, I will re-enter.
And this is years before the single Feeling Hot hit the waves.
Oh yeah, this was no Nelly. Although, did you see that he's no longer wearing a Band-Aid?
I was not doing Nelly.
Oh, I was doing Hot and Her.
Well, all right.
Which seems more appropriate since it's a confined space. Come on, Byron.
Good gracious, asses bodacious. Doesn't seem to fit. Mm-hmm. Strangely enough, I was just reading about Laika, the first dog, supposedly, in space, and Laika actually died within the first few hours of being out of orbit of heat and panic. Not surprising. It doesn't seem like they figured out how to control temperature in space.
If you just take a human who has no idea what's going on, throw them in a capsule and launch them into space.
I think that they had a feeling about what was going on. But
that's the equivalent of the dog. Clearly they can't explain to the dog what the hell's going on. The dog has no idea why it's been put in this weird space, orbiting around Earth, which obviously, the whole thing is just disgusting.
Well, yeah, there's images that I've seen of these kennels that they put the dogs in, and it just kind of holds them still inside this very uncomfortable looking shape. So it's not like they're free floating inside of a capsule in space. They're literally trapped in a box.
Yes, I understand that, but it's very scary.
Don't like it.
So that recording, some people assert is the first recording of a female in space, and though of course we can't say for certain, it does sound like a pretty feminine voice. A lot of people will say that this is complete bunk.
Sure.
It has been very difficult for people to disprove these recordings, but like so many things in Captain Kelly's world, it has been equally difficult to prove them. So, the scientists who communicate with me regularly and are very frustrated by what I consider evidence.
The growing number of scientists screaming at you via email every week.
They would say it's not scientific because it can't be tested. And I guess that's true.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned this is just one of several recordings that they had. And these stories were picked up and played on the radio by Swiss Italian radio stations, right?
Yes, they were. And in fact, if you look at the YouTube video of this sound clip, it actually has some inaccurate information on it. It says it happened in 1961, which could have either been before or after Yuri's trip. But it actually was 1963, which is interesting because it was well after that first cosmonaut in space. And apparently if we are to believe the recording, the Soviets were still really ironing out the kinks. There are other recordings that these brothers had. As I said, there were 9 that they released. The first one is probably the most notable. They say it was a recording of a crewed spacecraft in May of 1960. All right, so this is a full year before Yuri's trip. A crewed spacecraft reports it is going off course.
Crewed like with crew, not crewed like slapped together.
Right, not like a Pippi Longstockings sailboat, but like spaceship with humans aboard.
And they're going off course, which is a horrifying thought as well.
Now, I know I said that there weren't any official American recordings, but this one's a little interesting because in November of 1960, so a little bit later, we're looking 6 months before Yuri's trip, there was an SOS Morse code signal that was sent from another troubled spacecraft leaving Earth's orbit. Now, Morse code is not solely utilized by Americans, right? So this could have been American, it could have been Russian, it could have been anybody, but because there wasn't any language involved in this one, we don't know. Then February 1961, again, it's pre-Yuri. They claim to have recorded audio of a cosmonaut suffocating. Scary.
Yeah, don't like that either. Yeah.
Literally right before Yuri. Okay, so hold the phone 1 second for me, Byron, because I'm going to bring in a theory.
Oh, it's in my hand.
Like 4 or 5 days before Yuri made his orbit, they say that they recorded a capsule that was orbiting the Earth, and it did so 3 times. Now, remember our story about our poor 23-year-old cosmonaut who shouldn't have used cotton balls?
I do recall that.
It seems very strange that at that stage in the space race, mere days before Yuri successfully launches into orbit, that they would be making such absurd errors as having a hot plate on and igniting an over-oxygen filled room. Like, that seems a little strange. And what we do know from the hospital records is that Bondarenko suffered from incredible burns. Is it possible that those burns came from re-entry aboard a capsule rather than on the ground mission training program?
Hadn't considered that.
Yeah, because Yuri was able to do it successfully just a few days later. So perhaps that is why Yuri was the death watch. He was sitting and staring at this burned to death man in a hospital bed, wondering if he was going to look the same.
Oh, God. Well.
Pretty spooky.
Yeah, it is spooky. And one of my main problems with the brothers' stories here is it seems like they're only capturing catastrophic fuck-ups every time. Like, as we go on through their list here, they're talking about 1961, an orbiting spacecraft makes
Byron,
an appeal for
clear,
help.
This isn't all that they captured. Oh. These are the ones that they released because this is what was controversial and unacknowledged by the countries involved. So they caught other things too. They caught signals, for example, from Sputnik and from Explorer 1, but none of that was contested. None of that was being hidden. So the reason they recorded these was because there was no official story that would explain these.
They didn't release the mundane recordings, though.
To the best of my knowledge, no, because why would you? I mean,
to prove
if you have recordings of me sleeping, Byron, are you going to release those? Or are you going to release the recordings of me drinking wine and talking about Close Encounters?
Well, it depends on what our listeners want. Patreon.com/Frightday. That would be a high...
I don't think anybody wants to listen to me sleep. I don't think I snore. I might, though.
Only one way to find out. $20 tier.
Some of the debunking pieces here make sense and others really don't make sense. People are saying that, well, if you listen to these recordings, there are a lot of cases where they are not following the traditional Soviet military communication protocols. Okay, I'm sorry, but if I was in a tiny little capsule out in outer space dying, I would not necessarily bring those protocols to the front of my mind. So I don't think that one works very well. Another criticism has come from, there are some statements in those tapes that are, I guess, not incredibly scientifically informed. And so based on the idea that the Soviets were only using very well-educated pilots on board their space exploration attempts, that would mean that nobody would have made those mistakes in how they were speaking about things. Like, one of the examples was escape velocity. You can read more details about this, but the idea is, okay, they would not have screwed that up. Now, to that I say, oh, you were only using really well-educated pilots except for the dogs. So if you're going to throw like stray dogs in as an experiment and you're not sure if you've got things right, there's not an incredible jump to throwing in relatively uneducated cosmonauts to test things before you put your fancy pants scientists in there.
Yeah, sometimes you get a Chris Gethard or Aparna in Space Force on the team.
There you go. I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm not saying that that would be morally right if it did happen. I'm just saying
I think we could
the morals displayed by
not.
Using dogs would be not incredibly different from that line of moral reasoning.
And I do want to say, I still have not determined what NASA shot into space. So it's very likely that we did at some point put chimps or dogs in space as well. It's just, I think...
But do you see what I mean? Like, it's just much better covered up. Also, we're reading an English-based internet that is still fairly anti-Soviet in its sentiment. So it does make sense that we're able to find more dirt on that than we are. If anybody out there has any knowledge of American cover-up space accidents, and I'm not talking fake moon landing. We've covered that, and I like it.
We've been there.
Right, we've been there. I'm talking accidents beyond the space shuttle explosions that we know about, beyond the Apollo 1 tragedy. Have there been other things that are unrecorded, unreported in a similar way to the Soviets? So when we listen to the debunking explanations for why the phantom cosmonauts or lost cosmonauts were nothing more than either a hoax or something that was mistakenly identified by these lovely brothers and the Swiss-Italian radio station that started playing them, One of the most common things that comes up is the story of Ivan Ivanovich. And Byron, are you familiar with the story of Ivan Ivanovich?
I don't think so.
Ivan Ivanovich is kind of like the equivalent of John Doe, just in Russian language rather than English language.
Sure.
And there was a test that was performed with an Ivan Ivanovich mannequin. The Soviets used this mannequin, shot it out into space, it re-entered. Oh. A bunch of people saw it re-entering and had no idea what was going on, so they scattered to like go save whatever was inside because they thought that there was somebody inside.
Sure.
And again, this is in that really short period of time leading right up to Yuri's flight. So this is...
There's a great picture of it. I believe it's now in the Air and Space Museum.
Yeah, Ross Perot bought it, and it ended up in the Air and Space Museum.
Far more startling than Buster from Mythbusters. This guy is... I don't know.
But the fact that they used that mannequin once has become evidence on the part of skeptics to support the idea that clearly they would have used a mannequin every single time. And again...
Sure, yeah.
I don't think that that's a good debunking point because... There are things that you can test with a mannequin and there are things that you can't test with a mannequin. And I have no doubt that they use plenty of Ivans to test certain variables. But once you get to a point, you've got to start examining how humans are going to interact, elements of actual human life that might interfere or support a space mission. So Ivan wasn't going to cut it for the full range of tests. Maybe they really lucked out and maybe Yuri was the first one that they actually tried to launch into orbit and it was that wildly successful. I'm skeptical. Byron, I'm real skeptical.
I am too. I do know that the Italian brothers did settle down at a certain point. Achille became a cardiologist, and Giovanni actually worked for the Italian police. He did phone taps for investigations.
Which, again, I mean, they must have trusted his ability to overhear things accurately.
Yeah.
Because that's an interesting field to jump into, from space tapping to earthbound tapping.
Or
who knows?
To manipulate what he hears to cover up crimes or pin it on someone else.
I don't think so, Byron.
All right.
No, I don't think that's it. But one of the brothers, and I don't know, I've got to look at which one now, but one of them lived to just a few years ago, which actually kind of bums me out. Thinking about the fact, 2015.
That's right.
Achille lived to 2015. We could have interviewed Achille for the show, Byron. Where were you?
I'm uncertain if Achille spoke English, but I guess...
That's okay. My sister speaks Italian. She could have translated for us.
She does. That would have been a great little chat.
Damn it. Now, I'm going to resist the urge, Byron, to do a part 2 because I know that Moon June is drawing to an end. However, at some point, I would really like to dive in and investigate more about accidents that have occurred from the 70s forward in our space programs on Earth. So keep in mind, we've got some extra players in now. We've got China, we've got India, the reemergence of Russia now working on some space programs. Clearly, we have America now with a Space Force. I am pretty doubtful that the deaths stopped when we are told that they stopped. And I would really love to do some additional digging into more modern phantom astronauts / cosmonauts / whatever they call Chinese astronauts / whatever they call Indian astronauts.
Great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for that report.
Oh, you're very welcome.
What a blast off.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Do you have kids yet?
No,
you really need
to soon.
Lean into the dad joke.
This wit is only going to decrease as I get older. And
it is.
Is it just laughing at me to make me feel okay? Is that what's next?
Yeah, I think maybe that's when we cross into taking advantage of somebody. I don't know.
Yikes.
You know, the Italians don't have a corner on the market of picking up space signals.
That's for sure. Well, I guess we should probably talk about that as we review The Vast of Night.
Hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.
Squirm.
I mean, I'll talk squirm.
I
just got to go read a Wikipedia summary real quick.
Don't. The Vast of Night is a 2019 American science fiction film directed by Andrew Patterson. The film is written by Patterson under the pseudonym James Montague.
Montague.
I can never do it right.
The only reason I can do it is because I was obsessed with Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, you're a big fan of the Capulets and the Montagues.
Montagues.
And also written by a guy named Craig W. Stanger. Over the course of one night in 1950s New Mexico, while all the residents of a small town watched a high school basketball game, a young switchboard operator and a radio DJ believe a mystery is afoot. So Andrew, very interesting character. I don't know if you've seen a picture of this guy. I urge you to look him up. He's quite the character.
He does not look like your typical film director.
Especially this kind of film. Andrew, his interest started in his sophomore year of high school. He worked as a projectionist, never went to film school. Like to hear that. Later, he formed a production company in Oklahoma City where he made commercials as well as promo shorts for the local basketball team, the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Oh, there's the basketball connection.
Yep.
Sam was saying he thought that this guy funded this movie himself.
He indeed did pay for it himself with the money that he made from making these TV commercials. And this film, he worked on it for a very long time. This is his first film. He started writing it over the summer in 2015, shot it in 2016. It's inspired by 1950 sci-fi films.
War of the Worlds, of course, which is where the call letters for the radio station come from. Because even though it's on the wrong side of the Mississippi to have a W call letter or call sign, it's for War of the Worlds.
Oh, that's fun. I didn't know that. They filmed it in 3 to 4 weeks with $700,000 that he had saved.
But money real well spent.
Oh, absolutely. At points. They shot it in Whitney, Texas, which is a population of about 2,000, according to a census from 10 years ago. Who knows what it is now. Shot it during the fall. They selected the town primarily because it had the right gymnasium for that one gymnasium shot. This is the strangest thing I discovered. In order to make it period correct, which is very important when you're doing a period film, they removed the three-point line on the basketball court in the gym, which cost them $20,000.
I mean, that's kind of crazy in terms of percentage of budget.
I mean,
like if it's Michael Bay, who cares? But your budget wasn't big here.
Yeah. It's interesting. If it wasn't Moon June, I'm sure we would have covered this, but the plot is said to be loosely based on something called the Kecksburg UFO incident. Do you know anything about that?
I do know about it. In fact, did I bring that up recently?
You might have. So it was 1965, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. A fireball was reported by people across 6 states.
Byron. This is supposedly the UFO incident. Remember the theory I discussed with Nazis on the moon?
Yeah.
That Die Glocken, their like ultimate weapon that was shaped like a bell and that supposedly could time travel.
Looks like that.
That it time traveled through time and crashed in Kecksburg on December 9th, 1965.
Yep, found the connection. We got it. Apparently, astronomers said it was a meteor burning up, but they released a statement, NASA did, in 2005, saying that experts examined fragments from the area and determined it was from a Soviet satellite, which is interesting as well. Who knows?
Another connection.
Yeah, especially since the records of their findings were lost in the 1990s. So honestly, who knows what it was, what they saw, but a lot of people saw it across 6 states and into Canada.
So can I tell you my Kelly summary of this movie?
Absolutely not. Not quite there yet.
Oh.
Andrew edited this film for an entire year. I said that he directed and wrote it under a pseudonym. He also edited it under a different pseudonym. Junius Tully was the name that he went with for that.
I bet there's a reason for it.
You want it to appear bigger than it is. So when you have a different guy writing and directing and editing, it looks bigger. But also, I did read something where he said that if this worked out, he wanted to keep living the same life he had, so he wanted to work under a pseudonym.
Well, the good news is until you get to like Scorsese level, very few people pay attention to what directors look like. So he's probably fine. I
mean, he referenced Soderbergh did it on a couple projects, and I think that was his inspiration for doing it. And Soderbergh comes into the picture here in a minute. He was rejected from 18 film festivals with this film.
Don't you like how on IMDb it's a list of all the film festivals he was rejected from?
I love it. It's amazing. But yeah, it finally premiered in 2019 at Slamdance Film Festival. People loved it. It won Best Narrative Feature Audience Award, and Steven Soderbergh also liked it, signed on as the executive producer, and then shortly after that, the film was acquired by Amazon Studios. It was released in drive-ins due to this fucking pandemic that we're in, and that's the new model, May 15th, and on Amazon Prime, it came out on the 29th of May.
Can I do my summary? it.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to mention one quick thing that I thought sounded nice. So he worked on this film for a very long time. Apparently, he has made a film in the meantime.
Ooh.
As of yet, untitled film, a revenge thriller set in the honeybee industry.
Oh, that sounds like it's got your name written all over it, Byron.
I mean, it just kind of all ties together.
I hope it's about honeybees destroying humanity because we deserve it.
I mean, my feeling is it's going to be more of like a... What are the other brothers? The Coens, you know?
I do like those brothers.
Kelly.
Okay, can I go now?
Yeah, absolutely.
First fun fact. The movie opens with a start to a television show from the 1950s that is very intentionally meant to look incredibly similar to Twilight Zone. And in fact, they were able to get somebody to voice it who sounds exactly like Rod Serling, which was amazing. Sam and I actually looked up whether the person who did the voice of quote-unquote Serling in Vast of Night was the same person that did the voice for Serling in the ride Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. It was not
the same,
according to what we could find, but it was really impressive. And so we start out with that. And by the end of the movie, I would tell you that this movie, hold on, is like a fusion between American Graffiti, episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return,
Bugsy Malone,
and a Twilight Zone show.
Yeah.
Do you remember episode 8 of the Twin Peaks: The Return?
I don't. Nah. We were watching it together, and then I think I bowed out pretty quick. Because
it was where they went back into the 50s. It was a retrospective episode. It was in the 50s.
Well, that's fun.
And so there were some very similar... Anyhow, this movie totally popped out of nowhere. It was one of those weird coincidences that people tell me don't exist, but I swear to God it exists. So I was channel surfing, and I was trying to find something for Sam and I and his mom actually to watch.
Kelly.
And I had just come upon this.
I told you about this movie.
No, you didn't.
I did.
Shh. No, you didn't. Never.
I did,
ever.
though, and you just
No, you
never
didn't.
listened to me.
I know. It's okay because you never listened to me either.
That's
so
true.
We're even.
Yeah, I guess we are.
I came upon it and I'm like, hey, Sam, how about this? And he literally plops down on the couch. He's looking at his phone in his Discord chat with a bunch of comic book folks and says, hey, my friend says we should really check out The Vast of Night.
Yeah, it's right in front of you. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, look, Sam. And we watched it. Everybody loved it. Sam's mom loved it. I loved it. Sam says it's the only good PG-13 movie that he's seen in recent memory.
I think that's fair.
I'm a
as
big
well.
fan.
Yeah.
I have no doubt, Byron, however, that I'm a bigger fan of it than you are. So I'm ready to tear you apart for whatever
why?
negative opinions you might have about this movie.
Why would
Go.
you say that?
I'm just kidding. I'm not really going
Goodness,
to.
No. Why would you think that I didn't like it? I think
because you inserted, I said that this was money well spent, and you said, at point.
No. I was talking about the money they spent on that basketball court was money well wasted.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
That's
all.
very
fair.
No, I think this is a pretty outstanding film. It's definitely, it's PG-13 for a reason. It definitely doesn't go anywhere that is necessarily scary at any point.
Oh, I think it's... Are you kidding me?
The first 20 minutes of this film are 100% dedicated to two folks. That's 500 Watt Faye, which is a great nickname given to her. She's the town's switchboard operator, being taught how to use her recorder with the help of a guy named Everett the Maverick, a local radio DJ. I think this is a really, really great jump into character development. As the two walk through the town to their night jobs, we get to know them and their relationship really quickly. And I mean, they get to learn a little bit about each other as well, along with us.
And they're just fun. To me, this is the part that felt more like American Graffiti. It's like really quick-paced dialogue.
Yeah.
The characters, I wasn't alive in the 50s, but based on media, this is what I have come to believe people in the 50s were like.
Sure,
They
smoking
wear
all the
poodle
time.
skirts and saddle shoes. They're all white.
Cat-eye glasses, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Some might even consider this first 20 minutes of this movie to be cute.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned the dialogue. It's like at this weird border of Sorkin, which I think works really well because it's like quick, fast, witty, but not so much that it's not believable. It just felt natural.
I loved that our heroine, Faye, was a super smart science chick because that often doesn't happen in things that take place in the olden days. Well, so I was very happy about that.
It doesn't, when it does happen, it's like a she's all that portrayed in a negative light.
She was a badass, and I'm sorry, but that whole like phone connection system.
The switchboard.
I would not have been able to do that for 3 minutes.
Well, did you know that's
so confusing?
That was actually a working switchboard that they found, I believe, in that town. It was part of the reason that they ended up shooting it.
That's so fun.
Yeah, really, really cool. And Faye Crocker, she's played by Sierra McCormick, who in 2012 won the Young Artist Awards Best Performance in a DVD film. Young ensemble cast for Spooky Buddies, which I believe is a spinoff of the spinoff of Air Bud. They're the buddies. It's the Halloween one. But also, she played Moira, the self-harming demon in Adam Egypt Mortimer's Some Kind of Hate, as well as Lizard in VFW. Both of those films we covered earlier in the show.
And she was on Curb for 2 years.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I need to watch those.
She's got some interesting history, and I freaking loved her.
I thought
she was so fun.
Sierra's great. I think she does really great work. This other guy, Everett, played by Jake Horowitz, he was in A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I imagine, did they never do a film version of that before recently?
I think there have been like a dozen film versions of it. There isn't such thing as a Shakespeare film that hasn't been made at least 10 times.
And also, I found this out, he's going to be in the upcoming Castle Freak reboot, which is a film.
I was just going to tell you that. Yeah.
Very exciting as well. But their chemistry in the beginning of this film and throughout is really, really amazing. Visually, this film is beautiful. Rich colors, a lot of these wide handheld shots, and so many long takes, which I don't know.
Yeah, I was just going to say the long walking one was like incredible.
I don't know how they did it. Their cinematographer's amazing. I'm sure we'll pull him up and get him some credit. But yeah, there's a quote from Andrew about the way they shot it. We cut fewer times, about 700 shots, when the average is 1,600 to 1,800. So they shot like less than half of a normal film. I mean, obviously they had either improvisation or they just knew their characters and knew their scripts so well, because these shots flowed and it was amazing. Like, I don't know, these performances were great.
They were, and I just had so much fun watching this. I know that you said you told me about this, but it has been so long since I, at least in my own head, completely unknowingly stumbled upon a movie that turned out to be so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
This was exactly what I needed.
Well, one of my big problems with this movie is it was exactly what you thought it was going to be. There was no real surprise. There's no big bang ending. There's no twist.
Really?
Yeah.
And I can't give anything away, but I was surprised at the end.
As the story unravels, there's no big twist. You kind of come across this mysterious signal, and you hear phone reports of a large object over someone's land, and they're going down into their basement. And as the night goes on, you keep hearing more and more of these reports come in, and the signal keeps coming in stronger and stronger. And I mean, what happens later, I feel like happens, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really debate this with you without spoiling things.
Sure.
I think that there was some fun.
I'm not saying the ride wasn't fun.
It did not play out exactly the way I thought it was going to play out, but to me, this isn't a movie that's about a Shyamalan anyway. Sure. This is a movie that's about...
I think you're talking about like the B story.
Yeah. And
once we meet up with Mabel Blanche and her story of the old horse witch. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting, but I don't think it was too much of a shocker what happens.
No, not necessarily, but again, like... People are going to yell at me for this. One of the reasons I like movies like this is because I personally believe that shit like this could happen.
Okay.
Which makes it super spooky and super fun. And the way that it played out, because I look at it as a more realistic thing, I guess I see more options for how it could have played out. Therefore, it wasn't a foregone conclusion for me.
Well, there's themes throughout this, and I think Andrew must have done some research, because like the Billy call, which I think is really interesting. Billy's on the line, which remind me, Billy played by Bruce Davis. I think he did a really, really great job.
Amazing job.
That whole phone call, it reminded me a lot of something like the Art Bell Area 51 call. I don't know if that's just like my dumb, uninformed.
It's cool. Billy was a lot more together than the Area 51 caller. But yes, I totally understand what you're saying.
Are there other calls that are also happening on Art Bell that are very similar to that, where people have these tales?
Yeah, I mean, so there's this story of the guy, he was out in the woods with his dog, and an alien supposedly killed his dog.
Sure.
He killed the alien and brought it back and put it in his freezer, and then the alien wasn't dead. Yes, there are
other examples,
but what I want to dig into, because it was the first that I'd heard of it, and I think it's brilliant if the writer came up with this. Like, I had never heard before this idea of these underground facilities being built by purely black labor.
Yeah, black and Mexican labor, because at the time, they wouldn't be believed.
Yeah, so if our fearless director, writer, editor, everythinger came up with that idea on his own. He's brilliant. If not, I need to figure out the root of that because that's something I would really like to look into.
I thought that reveal in the conversation was probably the best flip out of everything. And it was small, but it was really, really interesting how Everett reacted to this because it was you could tell the nuance of Everett's character when Billy came out and said that he was black, and Billy had this insecurity in his voice, and you could tell that Everett was like a more progressive guy that was like excited, I guess, about.
Right.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I thought that the way they handled that was really, really cool. And Billy said something in that call where he says, everyone knows pieces, but no one knows the whole thing, which is something that is echoed by Bob Lazar.
Oh, well, it's echoed by everybody that I think is reputable within the field of, reporting UFOs and bases and things like that. Now, I also think that Everett, and I can't remember if it was either Sam or my dad that called this to my attention, but Everett, I think it was my dad, was almost reminiscent of Art Bell.
Sure.
Like when Art Bell was younger, if you look at younger pictures of Art Bell, he wasn't quite as handsome as Everett.
I mean, Everett's
there's some
stud.
similarities there. And just the way that he approached, we got to get this on the air. Even when things went haywire at the station, he grabs his mobile recorder. I'm like, this is Byron. But my dad was like, yeah, that's Art Bell.
Well, I mean,
dedicated to getting the story.
Yeah, no, Everett's character was very strong. The way that they handled the subtlety of the small cast, but kept it moving, was really cool. The gears were always turning in this film. No one's sitting to talk. Well, other than being on the radio. But the film's kind of broken up into these segments of information given in monologues. So it's not like, I guess some could say it was like an exposition dump, but it wasn't really like...
the whole thing just felt very natural to me.
Sure.
It was one of those rare movie experiences where I really wasn't pulled out of the story and the world of the movie at any point.
I think they did a really great job. And like I said, the only problem is that it wasn't really unexpected, but at this point it was just so well executed that it doesn't really matter.
Can I give my final thoughts?
Yeah, let's do that.
This is without question going to end up in my top 10 of the year. Are you really upset about that?
It's a sci-fi film. This is a horror podcast.
You stop it. Aliens are horror.
Well, I mean, sometimes they are.
This was one of the most enjoyable movie experiences I have had in recent memory. It's right up there with Ready or Not. I find it difficult to really feel completely immersed in a movie when I watch it at home. It's just so much easier for me to get into that zone in the theater because it's dark. I can't be wandering around and doing other crap. I'm just sitting there and watching a movie. So this movie was able to put me in the zone as much as a movie theater is, which was probably the first time that's happened since quarantine. I love it. I hope that this guy makes a million more movies that are just as good. I also hope he's not a jerk because we know so little about him. I'm really hoping he's not a mean, nasty guy, that he's a good guy. He's going to make a lot of good movies. I'm excited to see this next one. Everybody has Amazon Prime, right? Go watch it. It's so good.
Someone you know
It's so good. Byron, you're going to hate me for this, but I give Vast of Night 9.1 squirrels and or chipmunks that chew through wires.
It's quite the score, Kelly. The chemistry between the two leads, amazing. And visually, this is just such a cool film. M.I. Litton Menz is the name of the cinematographer. He's working on an untitled Robert De Niro project coming out soon. He's been working for a very long time. I'm glad Andrew spent the money on him because I think this film relies heavily on the atmosphere. The way they shoot everything is so cool. It has this great energy to it. And that one shot from the switchboard office to the basketball court to the radio station, it's like a minute long, but it doesn't feel long at all. It's really, really a visually beautiful one-take shot, and it just feels good. This film feels good, and I think I needed that this week. I have trouble covering sci-fi for the show, but this week I'm giving it a pass.
It's not sci-fi.
It's a great sci-fi film, and for those reasons, I'm going to give Vast of Night 7.8 cigarettes. Which they may look cool, they aren't cool. Don't do it. Don't smoke, kids.
There you go.
All right, covered my butt. And those are our thoughts on The Vast of Night, which, as Kelly mentioned, is available on Amazon Prime right now. I think we both recommend you check this out. And when you do, I want to know what you think. Hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at Frightday. Send us an email, contact@frightday.com. You can leave a comment below this episode in the show notes at frightday.com. There's pretty much comments everywhere. I noticed a bunch of comments I hadn't read on our SoundCloud page, which is another way to reach out to us now that I'm aware of it. Or we could have a big conversation about this in the Facebook group, facebook.com/group/Frightday. The only reason to have Facebook.
It's true.
And if you like
Byron,
her,
if
yes.
What?
I was going to say, and if you like our show and want to help us make it even better, what can you do?
You can listen to me talk about Close Encounters of the Third
That's
Kind.
not it. We're going to grab something spooky at shop.frightday.com. You should know that by now.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. Do we have those robes yet? I need a robe. I need a new robe.
No cult robes yet, but I'm working on some, I guess what would be called a collection of merchandise. I can't wait to share that with you, but right now you can grab t-shirts, pins, cassette tape. That's always great for a summer road trip. The Roswell incident, a Captain Kelly's Cryptids and Conspiracy special presentation. Good time. Take that dead grandparent's car of yours that has a cassette player in it and hit the road. There's all kinds of stuff at shop.frightday.com. And we are gonna stop talking to each other. It's only 5 p.m. right now, so we're not gonna commit to keeping our lips sealed, our traps.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be talking a lot, just not to you.
But our voices, they continue over at patreon.com/Frightday when you subscribe to Frightday Screamium. Earlier in the show, we talked about a new episode of... Oh, God, I'm already regretting it. Toast to Toast PM with Wine Kelly. We're finally covering Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I should be more excited about it, but Kelly, make up for it for me, please.
I mean, first of all, you just need to let go of this idea that aliens don't equal horror. Mm-hmm. Second of all, it's an embarrassment to you as a human being that you haven't seen this movie, and we're going to correct that embarrassment this week.
What a great...
So you should be excited.
Mm-hmm.
Third of all... Don't be afraid of aluminum. Be afraid of energy drinks.
Oh, God. All right. Well, it's a lot to ponder. Other shows, Captain Kelly's Cryptids and Conspiracies, bonus episodes, Byron Syria Corner, The Writer's Room, Cinema Autopsy, all kinds of stuff. And you're helping us take steps towards this being more and more of a real job.
Someday. Yes.
One of the great ways you could help the show would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening to this. Best way to get us up charts, in ears. A guy named John Alex did just that, and he actually did it on Stitcher, which is something that we don't get very many of.
Very cool.
He said 5 out of 5 stars. Spoopy, which is the title of his review. Byron, Kelly, and Sam are hosts with legit hosty talent, not just some dorks doing a podcast. They should really be doing this for a professional career. That's very nice that you say that.
Oh, that is nice.
The show is free, but after a year-ish, I subbed up for the first time to any show ever because they genuinely deserve this to be a full-time job. This is very nice. All 3 hosts are hilarious. Research into paranormal subject matter is extremely thorough, and it's always equal parts curiosity and skepticism. Thank you. The movie reviews are spot on.
All over the map.
And spoiler warnings are loud and clear, so I can always skip if necessary. I feel very safe listening to them review a horror film I haven't seen. The top-tier editing just puts it over the top. So huge props to Byron for the work that must go into making this all come together. That's very nice. This is a great review so far. I'm having a great time.
It is.
The first time I heard the show was on Dark Matter Radio. I sleep with a pillow speaker, and I woke up at 2 or 3 a.m. with a replay of Frightday catching my ear. It was so good I ended up wide awake listening to the whole show. This might be the best review yet. The next day was a bucket of ugh. So the trade-off was a new favorite show that I've listened to ever since. That's it.
That's awesome. Wow.
John, Alex, thank you so much for those kind words. I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate you listeners, whether you've reviewed the show or not. I just like people who have reviewed the show better. So you can easily remedy that by picking up the phone that you're listening to this on and just clicking the stars and typing some words. That's all.
I love it.
Next week, June... I believe this is it. Are we ending with my tale?
So people have been waiting all month for. People pretend to like me, but what they really like are your creepy serial stories.
I don't know what to say about that. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. Of course it's going to be fun. You say that like it's a surprise or people will be surprised that it will be fun.
It just takes an emotional toll on me every time. So
you're such a wuss.
All right. Kelly, where are you going to be until next week?
Oh, I'm going to be at Kelly Frightday on Twitter. You can email me, kelly@frightday.com. We're Captain Kelly Jennifer on Instagram.
And I'm at Byron McKoy on Twitter and Instagram, byron@frightday.com. That's my email address. And until next Frightday, I'm Byron.
I'm Kelly.
Stay in the cellar. You've been listening to an Audio Wool original, produced by Byron McKoy, theme music provided by Cemeteries. For more programs like this, visit audiowool.co.